I'm here with Tory Hale. We're doing an episode of Freezin for a reason. We're going to interview this guy about, tell us about yourself.
Life coaching, emotions, that the interplay of emotions and beliefs have been the very thing that's also built your whole life. And it's probably the thing that's stopping you from being everything that you want to be. So I love to share about that and deep dive, especially with this guy in the Freezing Cold podcast.
Let's get in the cold
pod.
Let's get in, baby.
All right, let's go.
Woo.
I think it's actually colder than last time.
Yeah, this does feel cold, but we got our first day of sunshine here, blessing us right now with this Freezin for a Reason episode. So Tori, thanks for coming and joining the cold water with me today.
Mm-hmm.
Been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, man, me too.
So Tori, I've had a chance to get to know you lately as a friend, and that's been a lot of fun. I know that community's important to you, and really been interesting to learn a little bit more about also what you do professionally with your coaching business. For those people that are listening, I'd just be really curious, maybe you can give us the high level overview of how your coaching is different from a lot of what's out there right now. What's your approach?
Putting that into simple terms is actually a tough one to start off with.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. Well, let's start off with, I help people get unstuck. And what I don't think we consciously realize is how those same patterns have been playing out for a very long time in our life. And what I focus on is what's the original root that started that. And it's usually something we discount. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we're shameful of it when it comes up. And so my approach is more unshaming that so that you can actually be loved in a moment that you were craving to be loved. Mm-hmm. So an example would be like, I needed a hug or to be seen that I was upset when I was a kid. And it seemed like such a small, distant memory. But how our nervous systems work, which maybe that'll come up, maybe not, but we needed another adult, another person. So this is why community is so important. We needed someone else that was calm to let our nervous system know, hey, don't freak out right now. And if we didn't have that, we created an entire almost like persona for the rest of our life built around that moment in time. And It's like belief systems, which then become thoughts, which then become behaviors. So an emotional pattern that you're repeating now in a relationship is probably from one of those moments in time that we don't even think about. So I like to go there first and unwind all of it, which is like the thorn in the foot, which I know we wanted to kind of dive into.
Yeah, let's go into that more. You mentioned that, on your website, I was kind of doing some reading and noticed this really cool analogy about the thorn in one's foot. Talk to us a little bit about that and what's the meaning with it.
So that's what makes me unique, right? Is that the beautiful question you just asked, going to the root first. And that wound is like having a thorn. Let's just actually say in your arm so we can visually say it as well. So let's say if there's a thorn in your arm, most of the time once it's there, it doesn't really hurt to touch. It only hurts when somebody else touches it. So that's why when we're a kid, we're like, don't pull it out, because it hurts to now start wiggling. Well, when there's that wound that happened when we were a child emotionally, let's say for me, it was like, it's perfectionism. So I had to behave to get love. So perfection equals love was the baseline root. That's the thorn. So if I don't do that, it hurts. It's like, I'm going to get rejected from love, from someone I want and crave love from. Well, instead of like being able to know what that is, especially since we're a child, we don't even know that wound is like, I just need love right now. Well, if someone else bumps it, instead of taking it out, since we don't know what it is, we're like, oh, but that hurt. So let me just build a bandage around it so that nobody bumps it.
Yes.
And then later, when somebody else bumps it, since we are still unaware of what it is, being that we're maybe 8 or under, maybe 10, even doesn't matter. It's just that we don't even know why it is, but somebody bumped it. So we build another barrier. And then somebody bumped it and we build another barrier. And then somebody bumped that until later, we have this huge cast that we're carrying around. And this is why I believe that so many people around like their 30s and 40s all of a sudden have these chronic pains, chronic diseases, is because they're carrying around those layers of that original wound, and now it's coming to fruition. So what I'm seeking to do is get down to that thorn. And yes, it's going to be painful because now you've built an entire cast around it.
Correct.
And we're going to expose that to the world, and that's going to be intense.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like we all have something that would represent this thorn
Mm.
that is something that we're dealing with in life, different struggles, or shame or pride or a past hurt or something like that. And I think the analogy is powerful when I read about it for me, because you present alternatives and you say, would you rather just leave that thorn there and build protection around it, or would you rather take it out, address it, address the root cause of it? So that's really cool that you unpack that. I think it's powerful.
Mm. What did you find that came up for you when reading about it? Was there a certain thorn that maybe came to mind for you?
I think it's probably there's probably something there when it comes to relationships,
Mm.
and you know, being willing to really put yourself out there in relationship, and go deeper and allow yourself to be vulnerable. I think there's
Mm.
so much power in vulnerability. Some of the coaching that I did last summer was around the challenge of that. Like, let's go ahead and make ourselves in a position where we're being authentically ourselves and allowing others to really know who we are, and being vulnerable. It kind of requires a level of vulnerability. I think for me also, in my life, I do feel blessed that I've grown up in a in the culture of like the church and Christianity, because there's a culture there of being vulnerable. I think in order to really connect with God in a genuine way, you've got to come before him and just be vulnerable, and get on your knees, so to speak. And so that's a practice that I've been in spiritually, and I
Mm.
think it helps me to then live that way with people in my life too.
Mm. So that would look like almost like confessions periods with groups or in church?
Confessions, I think, is a component of it,
Mm.
but I think it's also just being willing to go into the unknown and open yourself up and really allow yourself to be seen by God, for example, or really be seen by others. And I think one of the great privileges that we have as Christians is that we don't carry the burden any longer of us having to be perfect,
Mm.
of us having to measure up to a certain performance, because we have the freedom of knowing that we're not perfect, and God loves us anyways,
Yeah.
and that He's perfect, and to point the light there, point the spotlight to where it belongs. So I think maybe that's helped.
Yeah. I think that's very powerful. And what I hear you saying with that is a relationship of something outside of yourself
Yes.
where you can then vocalize and be seen in whatever's there. And in this case, around religion, it's God and Jesus who came to bear these for us. But that's what's, I think, missing more and more in the common world. Like, there was this book that came out even 15 years ago that's called Bowling Alone, and it was about how bowling leagues are on the downplay, but it's where he started, and it's basically the all tribal community things that kind of built America, even in a sense, are all kind of disappearing. That we tend to do a lot more alone. So I believe that's a part of why we're running into so many mental health problems where people aren't able to just go confess. And that's really what it comes down to, is being able to get into a place, recognize that there's something bigger outside of yourself, give that power up, and be seen in all of it, like all of it, that you are imperfect. And regardless of what your imperfection is and mine, if we can connect on being imperfect, then we have a connection.
Yeah.
But instead, we're like in our heads creating that story, being like, well, he doesn't feel like this type of shame. I only have this type of shame. So
Right.
I'm not going to share it out loud.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
end up rejecting you but because I'm really just rejecting myself. So I close down, which doesn't allow you in.
Yeah.
So now I go home and I'm alone in my head.
And I think that's a great part of it. It's like, oh, I'm not the only one. We're in this together. We're in this journey together.
We're in this tub together.
We are. Which brings me to my next question. Where did your love of water come from? I didn't know that you were a competitive swimmer before. So tell us about that, and how did that develop for you?
Love of water. Well, my dad, I know this, I wasn't conscious for it, that as soon as my umbilical cord fell off, he threw me in a pool. Which, because he had read that helps create like swimming muscles and like becomes a natural born swimmer.
Oh.
And he was passionate about swimming, so he always wanted me to be a swimmer. And I will say, when it became time for me to choose into it, even though it wasn't really a choice at like age 8, I had to, and I didn't want to, but I just happened to be good at swimming. So him forcing me to do swimming over and over, and him being a coach he was my coach for like 2 weeks, thankfully. Like, love, with nothing but love for it, but I just wanted someone else outside my family to be my coach.
Yes.
And it was the community that kept me there. But I had a natural gift for swimming, and so it was the community showing up on relays. Like, I was the fastest kid when came to relays, but in practice I would just be slacking off. but it was all those people that kept me going. And I will say it kept a passion for physical fitness and facing things that are challenging,
Yes.
even when you don't want to, because you're a kid, you're also, of course you don't want to, you just want to go play. But it did create that discipline where, like, someone said the other day how long they had to take off for some surgery or whatever. And I was like, I don't think I've taken more than like 2 days off my entire life from any movement. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a passion. And so water, as soon as cold plunging became like the popular thing, it was like, okay, cool, let's do it. Like, I had to jump in cold water. It wasn't maybe as cold as cold plunge, but I had to be in it for 2 hours. Like,
Yeah.
certain mornings up in Washington where I'm from, the water was only naturally heated in the summer, and we would have a cold front. So the water would be so cold that our 2-hour practice, my arms actually never even got feeling.
Oh my gosh.
So jumping into it for 3 minutes, I'm like, come on, guys, this
Yeah.
is easy.
Yeah. Or 20 minutes.
Or 20 minutes, like we're going for this time.
Yeah. I'm doing pretty good. I'm not shivering yet. How about you?
Yeah, it feels great, actually. It's like a nice
Excellent.
sort of like a little hot tub out here because we're in Austin.
Excellent. So you touched on something. Let's go deeper into that, which is what we're doing kind of right now is a representation of going to something that's uncomfortable on purpose to, build mental, I would say to build mental toughness, to build resilience. But I learned from you that this actually goes much deeper and that there's some actual physiology behind facing our fears. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I love the blend of ancient wisdom to kind of connect to the church. And we were just having that discussion before we jumped in, as well as what we can show in MRIs and good, healthy psychotherapy. And that is that when you voluntarily face the thing that scares you, that you gain more courage, and that area of the brain, as well as the fear, shrinks. It's not that it actually gets smaller, but that whole area gets smaller because the courage steps in. If you were to face it involuntarily, it actually can re-traumatize. So it's always the choice. But what we kind of want inside of that, since it is that choice and voluntarily facing your fears, you want it to be in chunks that you can manage. If you just go to like your biggest fear, as I like to share on my calls, is like there's little mini dragons and then there's like the big dragon, because that's one of the myths and stories that people can connect with. You want to continually face the little mini dragons. Like in a video game, you get bigger and better and you get more courage to face the big boss because you know how to play. It's that same idea here where you face those. And so cold is an example of, well, I can manage this. If it's too cold, I can get out. But it scares me to go for 3 minutes. I don't know what's going to happen because you have a singular focus and it's just about breathing and literally staying alive. For some people, it goes to that extreme. They lose sight of their breath and they go. But, and voluntarily facing all those does change your DNA expression, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Is what they've shown inside of research.
Yeah.
It changes your DNA expression, and those DNAs that turn on then create new proteins, which then can feed into the brain and creates new neurons, so new neural pathways. So that's how the area of the brain grows. That, and you also get the expression of healthy body, a healthier body, because an expression of more DNA means you're more immune to diseases. You're more immune to any new germs, bacteria, what have you. And that's how we've evolved, is to continually have the opportunity for new genes to be expressed that stay in front of whatever the latest diseases are. And when that doesn't happen, obviously we have big wipeouts in history. But it's a full expression of who you are by facing your fears voluntarily. And just to connect it to what I started with in the biblical story. It's the same staff that's on medicine these days. The snake around the staff is actually pulled from one of the Old Testament stories of after Moses came out of the desert with the Israelites. There was sickness, I believe, going around, and I'm maybe paraphrasing around this, but they asked him to speak to God about what to do about it. And God told Moses to build this statue, the snake, that's golden, and have everybody stare it in the eyes. And those who could, all of a sudden were getting healthier. They were recovering.
They chose to go to it.
And some people didn't, and they're the ones who stayed sick.
Yeah, and the snake, I mean, it's a symbol that I think for most people represents fear. I mean, I'm afraid of snakes even today. A healthy fear, I'd say. So yeah, you got to kind of go to that fear intentionally, trusting God that he's going to take care of you,
And it's like the there's this old adage, right, of if you can build immunity to snake venom, for example, by exposing yourself to small doses. Same idea.
Sure.
But you're doing it visually for a psychoanalytical perspective, aka your mental health. So that you can go have the better relationship, have a better friendships, start that business, make more money by taking bigger risks, because you're facing the little fears along the way. And every single time you do, you literally become like a new person, which refreshes your cells and keeps you younger.
Right.
And we can show that you have a different DNA expression and you are a slightly different person each time you do it. And from what I believe, especially like overlaying it with the church, is there's no limit to that in this human existence. You can become the most courageous as possible, and we don't even know what that limit could be.
Right.
That takes fully believing in God, actually, is what kind of lands on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's beautiful. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things where I've thought about the mental benefits of getting in this thing. Going to something that's difficult on purpose builds this mental resilience, and then you can handle stressors in your life a lot better and everything. But learning that there's an actual physiology behind it, let's just add that to the list of all the different things that your body does when you're in cold or when you're in like the sauna. When you talked about this practice being something that is tied to preventing chronic disease or helping people overall stay healthy or maybe live longer and better, it's really interesting because, you know, there's so many great studies out of Scandinavia. Dr. Susanna Soberg has many other people before her created studies around using sauna, you know, sauna 4 to 5 times a week with a certain protocol. Same with cold plunge, you know, on a certain protocol, has a life extension effect for like all-cause mortality. And this could be one of the mechanisms of action there.
Exactly. From I don't remember her specific studies, but Dr. Rhonda Patrick speaks to that. And she basically says that you're waiting for a certain moment in the sauna to get the heat shock to release new proteins, which is what the benefit then comes into your immunity.
Yeah.
But just to tie it into like the emotions, I don't know if it's for you, but so I'm curious about this. Do you notice that even if you're in there by yourself or with others, you start talking about more of like the things that are going on in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also part of it, is that the heat, the cold, a hard workout, like this is for me why CrossFit became so popular, is you're quiet beforehand. Everyone's kind of timid before the workout, but afterwards everyone's just sharing about all their life. And that was always fascinating to me of like, well, why is that? Because getting the body moving, all those spots of tension, the somatic piece, which is what I'm looking for, that thorn. It's literally like emotions are energy in motion. And if we didn't feel them, they create tension. That's the thorn. So when we feel like we're in one or the other, well, when you're cold, what's the automatic reaction? Is like, well, I gotta keep the organs alive. And if there's constriction there, that's how I believe emotions come up. Like we want to start sharing them. And same thing in heat. So I'm curious if you notice that when you're in sauna by yourself or with others.
Definitely. Like if I'm kind of feeling a little bit of brain fog and running into some, you know, blocks or whatever, or if I'm needing to have a conversation with someone and I'm afraid to get on the phone call, I just don't feel at my best. If I start moving, if I do the hot, if I get in the cold, I get out, I feel much more prepared for that. I'm in a better state of mind. And, you know, partly that's probably like the dopamine, the endorphins and so forth. And also just the mental piece of, hey man, I just did something that was uncomfortable. Let's go do another one.
Do you ever notice that you get like, if you've been stuck on something, because I heard you say that, do you get like an insight when you're in there? Like you all of a sudden get like the new business idea, a new, like, what should I say to this person kind of ideas? Do those ever come to you in there?
I think so, because I think it facilitates, especially when I do it by myself, it facilitates a moment of meditation where I'm not distracted, I'm not by my phone, not by the computer, not, you know, hearing the dings or anything else. You're just out in nature. You're literally submersed in water, in nature. And I think it creates like a meditation for me, that when there's that clarity, I think new ideas can come up. You can kind of see a path where there wasn't one before.
Yeah, I love that. A new path that you didn't see before. Love that. Like, it's exactly what we're shooting for. And I truly believe, like, honestly, if we just got more time alone, that would be a huge benefit to everybody. It's like,
true.
Like, yeah, come work, and like if you need to keep doing your job, like hop into places where you can be supported continually. But I bet if you like once a month just had no other distractions and just lived your life without your phone for 3 days, you'd probably figure out a lot more stuff too. It just tends to be our first distraction because there's emotion under it that's uncomfortable. So you notice that, like, no phone, you're in there sitting, it became naturally meditation. And I think that since we're close in age, we can also just talk to, like, we used to have meditation just by existing before. We didn't have phones. Like,
that's right.
Walk to the bus stop, meditation, boom, waiting for the bus.
Lots of opportunities to be bored before.
So
boredom creates creativity.
Exactly. I was just processing stuff that way.
Well, I have 3 more questions. Starting to get a little cold, so we'll keep it to 3 probably. But one is, I would like to hear an example from your coaching practice. I know you coach men and women. What is one of the more common challenges that might be relevant for our audience that you see men are struggling with to overcome that you help with?
Um, being vulnerable. You brought it up earlier, right? It's like being vulnerable, and it was the same for me. Is well, if I am seen as needing help right now, well, then how can I be seen as a protector? How can I be seen as someone who's safe and trustworthy?
I see.
So that was like kind of the story that was created around that emotion, that if I was to share and be weak, because it was a story that was that if I share, I'm weak.
Mm.
At least that's what I grew up with in my house too. It's like you don't talk about those things. Men don't talk about those things. They push them down, and you just keep moving forward. But strength is actually by expressing them out loud,
Yeah,
like and putting them out there.
it
It's just that we
is.
haven't been conditioned and shown how to do it,
Yeah.
right? Especially this generation, I find, has not been able to be shown what that can look like healthily,
Yes.
without like all of a sudden becoming a burden, or what was thrown around too much, but toxic masculinity, where it's like aggressive. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, just being able to say like, I just need help right now. I need to be seen as like I had a hard time in a relationship being able to receive when I was sick. Like being seen in that was like, oh no, like now they're gonna reject me, and quite the opposite.
Yeah.
It was the opposite, but I needed that example to be able to be like, oh.
Well, when
And
you
I see that the most with men.
when you said that's a show of strength,
Mm.
to me the two things that come to mind why vulnerability creates maybe that show of strength is that it often is accompanied with a level of humility
Mm-hmm.
and honesty,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like a couple things that are in kind of they're a little bit more rare these days is that honesty and your vulnerability. What about for the female clients that you see? What are women, what's a common thing that you're helping them overcome?
That men are actually a safe place, ironically. It's like,
Oh,
it's like men weren't shown how to express their emotions, so they held it all in. Well, then that means, like for my example and how I grew up, was like that there's an explosive behavior waiting to happen.
yeah.
Well, if that's an explosive behavior waiting to happen, what do you think's happening to like the feminine? It's like they're not feeling safe to express at all, because someone who by nature is typically stronger and larger is capable of now doing harm when those buttons are pushed.
Yes.
So like they're running into these places where it's like, well, men are just unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning how to be courageous in that and share what they can, and learning that men are not as a whole unsafe, because that's the story. It becomes when we have some type of trauma, it becomes very much very black and white, victimizer on both sides, men and women. And so we tend to just put it into a very simple story like that. So it's like, well, whatever I went through, well, now all men are unsafe.
Yes.
So we're undoing that and getting them to see that it's okay to be seen,
Yeah.
and they won't be rejected for their emotions, because typically women have a lot more emotions that, and it's if rightfully so, they're so intuitive, like they need to, for arguably so, like raising a child, to be more in tune with their emotions. But I see that behavior is underneath it is that they feel too much,
Mm.
and
Yes.
that's what caused them to be so scared, is like they were told they were too much by an unsafe
Yeah.
masculine.
Yeah.
And so now when you get them to recognize you're not too much,
Yeah.
express everything that you need to express.
That's good.
And so both need to happen. Men
That's
also
really
need
good.
to be the safe place for that, to receive that, and women need to recognize that they can.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I think last question, what have we not talked about that you think, is on your mind that you'd like to talk about or share?
The It sounds, well, I'm putting it in simple words, but the best way is to start with how you feel, instead of, like, for example, trust. Let's just bring that up because it connects to this. You don't build trust by offering support. You build trust by asking for help.
I like that.
And that means being in tune with your emotions. So we're in a world where everybody's like, well, that triggers me. That triggers me. It's like, well, that triggers me. Like, that's the phrase. Like, it's like, that's your problem then.
Right.
So what is that triggering? What are you
Mhm.
feeling? Find it, bring awareness to it, and vocalize what it is to people that you trust that's facing those fears. Like, oh, that triggers me. I feel really rejected right now. I feel very sad right now. Own that without somebody else needing to save you in that. And that's what builds trust, connection, and actually heals that, is just getting it out.
Yeah.
But we tend to bring it to somebody else, like, oh, you're doing this wrong. We create the stories. We say like, oh, because you did this, that means you don't care about me. but everybody has a different definition of what they went through and what love means to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so since everybody has a different definition, but it's so easy based on our definitions to be like, well, because you didn't fulfill that,
Yeah.
that means you don't XYZ. Yeah,
Right.
they're probably not thinking about that at all. They're going based on what they defined it as.
Yeah.
So the only solution for me through, the best solution, is to say, how did that make you feel?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, when you did this, like that means you don't love me. It's like, hey, I noticed that when this happened, it felt like I was being rejected,
Yes.
and I don't believe that was the intention, but I'm just letting you know that's how it felt.
Right.
So completely different situation.
Yes.
And that's my encouragement for everybody, is just getting in tune with us and just connect to something very theoretical. Is like the root of good, healthy democracy is that there's the sovereign individual who's facing those things themselves
Yes.
internally, instead of trying to go outwards. Because when we go outwards, we tend to go into like that whole victim mentality on both sides, where I get into a group and there's a group think around that. So it's like, oh, if these people don't do this, they're all bad. If you address those inner shames, guilts, like inner emotions, those inner thorns for you, that's the best functioning path of a healthy society.
Yes.
In general, it all comes back to just you focusing on you. And to tie it through, because I love that you brought in so much biblical as a nice closure. Maybe you're getting the quote better, but Jesus said, it's like, why are you worried about the dust in your neighbor's eye when you have a plank in yours?
Yes.
So
exactly.
Like, come back to you, express how you feel, own that for you, continually go in, and that's how we build trust, community, connection, and really start to have a better place to live.
Man, that's really good. That was powerful when you said, when we have a trigger, we say, that's my trigger. I have a trigger. Yes, you have a trigger. Work on you. Start with yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another example of humility. You got to come to a place of understanding that there's an opportunity for us to grow and learn through everything that we do in relationships and beyond. So, man, this is good. I'm cold. Let's get out.
Yeah, I think we might have broken a record. But thanks for
so
being
too.
here, man. This was great.
It was great.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Woo!
Reason for a reason.
Here we go.